I've always believed that we know less about our neighbors than we like to think. Sure, you wave at them, exchange polite smiles, and maybe make small talk in passing. But when it comes down to it, how much do we really know about the people living just a wall away? What I experienced last year made me rethink everything about human nature and left me questioning my own sense of reality. Let me start from the beginning. I moved into my current apartment last year after a rough breakup. It wasn't the most glamorous place, but it had charm, an old building in a quiet neighborhood with just 4 units. Each apartment shared walls with the others, so the building wasn't particularly private, but the rent was affordable, and I figured I'd make it work. The first few days were uneventful. I met my upstairs neighbors, an elderly couple who were friendly enough, and the guy next door, a mid-30s programmer who worked from home. The fourth tenant was someone I only heard about in passing. Her name was Maria. People described her as quiet, which in hindsight should have been a red flag. The first odd thing I noticed was the tapping. It started a week after I moved in. Late at night, when everything else was quiet, I'd hear a rhythmic tapping coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was pipes, but the sound didn't follow any logical pattern. Some nights, it would be faint and distant. Other nights, it felt like it was right behind my headboard. I mentioned it casually to my upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Walker, one morning. She gave me an odd look but didn't say much. "Old buildings make noise," she said, her tone too dismissive. A few days later, I heard the tapping again, this time accompanied by something else, a faint whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakably human. My heart raced as I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to hear more clearly. The whisper stopped abruptly, as if whoever, or whatever, was on the other side knew I was listening. About 2 weeks after the whispers began, I had my first encounter with Maria. It was late afternoon, and I was coming back from the grocery store. She was standing at the base of the stairs, staring at the wall with an intensity that made me stop in my tracks. "Maria," I said hesitantly, clutching my grocery bags. She turned to me slowly, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She looked off. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled and stained, and there was a strange, almost feral look about her. "You hear it too, don't you?" she said, her voice low and raspy. I didn't know what to say. "Hear what?" I asked cautiously. She gave a dry laugh, her lips twisting into a strange smile. "The walls. They talk, you know. You just have to listen." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" But Maria didn't answer. She just turned and walked away, disappearing into her apartment and slamming the door behind her. The night after my encounter with Maria was when things truly took a turn. I was lying in bed, trying to ignore the now familiar tapping, when I heard a scraping sound. It was faint at first, like something being dragged across a surface, but it quickly grew louder. I sat up, my heart pounding, and strained to listen. The sound was coming from the closet. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to stay put, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I grabbed my phone for light and walked over to the closet, my hands trembling. When I opened the door, I found nothing unusual at first. My clothes were hanging neatly, and the floor was clear. But then I noticed something, a faint draft coming from the back wall. I ran my hand along the surface, and froze when I felt a slight indentation. It was a panel, a hidden one. I stared at it, debating whether to open it. Before I could make up my mind, the scraping sound came again, this time from directly behind the panel. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. Whatever was behind that wall wasn't normal. The next day, I decided to confront Maria. I knocked on her door, half expecting her not to answer, but after a long pause, she opened it just enough to peer out at me. "What's behind the walls, Maria?" I blurted out. Her expression darkened. "You shouldn't have opened it," she whispered. "I didn't open anything," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was entirely true. Maria shook her head. "It doesn't matter. It knows you're there now." "What knows?" I demanded. She didn't answer. Instead, she shoved a piece of paper into my hand and slammed the door. I unfolded the paper to find a crudely drawn map of the building. There were lines marked in red, tracing hidden pathways between the walls. At the center of the map was a note written in shaky handwriting. "It lives here. Don't let it find you." Over the next few days, I became obsessed with the map. I couldn't stop thinking about the hidden pathways or the possibility that someone or something was using them. I started noticing small things I hadn't before: scratches on the walls, scuff marks near baseboards, and the faint smell of mildew that seemed to come and go. One night, I finally decided to investigate. I pried open the panel in my closet, revealing a narrow passageway just wide enough for someone to crawl through. The air was damp and stale, and the darkness seemed to stretch on forever. Armed with a flashlight and a kitchen knife, I climbed into the passage. My heart was racing, and every sound, every creak, every drip of water made me jump. The passage led to a series of tunnels that snaked through the building. I found old furniture, discarded clothing, and even a mattress. It was clear that someone had been living here. And then I found something that made my blood run cold: a collection of photographs. They were all of me, taken through peepholes and cracks in the walls. Some were from months ago, before I had even moved in. I stumbled back to my apartment, clutching the photos, my hands trembling. My mind raced as I tried to process what I'd seen. Some of the pictures were from before I'd moved in, taken from angles suggesting someone had been watching the previous tenant too. But there were others, fresh ones, that showed me in bed, watching TV, and even sitting at my kitchen table. The most recent photo was taken just 2 nights ago. I had always felt uneasy in the apartment, but this was undeniable proof. Someone had been inside, watching me. I called the police immediately, trying to explain the situation. They came within the hour, but their response was lukewarm at best. They glanced at the photos, checked the hidden passage, and chalked it up to vandalism or squatters. "Secure the panel," one officer suggested. "If you don't use the passage, no one can get in." That was it. They left with promises to keep an eye out for suspicious activity, but I could tell they weren't taking me seriously. That night, I barely slept. I'd shoved a dresser in front of the closet panel and left all the lights on. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside made my skin crawl. Sometime after midnight, I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake by a loud thud. My heart was pounding as I sat up in bed. The sound had come from the living room. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed, trying to stay as quiet as possible. When I entered the living room, my stomach dropped. The dresser I had pushed in front of the closet panel had been moved, and the panel itself was wide open. Someone had been inside. My breathing quickened as I scanned the room, looking for any sign of an intruder. That's when I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper. It was coming from the hallway. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. But instead, I followed the sound. The hallway was empty, but the whispering continued. It was coming from the walls now, faint and rhythmic. I pressed my ear to the drywall, and for a moment, I thought I could make out words. "You shouldn't have stayed." The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I called my landlord, demanding answers about the building's history and Maria. He was evasive at first, but after some persistence, he finally admitted that Maria had reported similar issues before. She kept saying someone was living in the walls, he told me. But no one believed her. "She's a little unstable, you know." I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was Maria unstable, or was she the only one who saw the truth? I decided to confront her directly. This time, when I knocked on her door, she let me in without hesitation. Her apartment was dimly lit, cluttered with papers and strange symbols scrawled on the walls. "You went in, didn't you?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, too stunned to speak. "You've seen it now. It won't stop," she continued. "Once it knows you, it doesn't leave you alone." "What is it?" I asked, desperate for answers. Maria hesitated before replying. "I don't know what it is," she admitted, "but it's not human. It's been here longer than any of us. It's attached to this place, to the walls, and it's hungry." Over the next few days, the activity in my apartment escalated. I heard footsteps in the walls at all hours of the day and night. Objects began moving on their own, small things at first, like keys or cups, but eventually larger items, like chairs and picture frames. The worst was the writing. One morning, I woke up to find words scrawled across my bathroom mirror in what looked like black soot. "Get out." I called the police again, but they found no evidence of a break-in. My friends thought I was losing it, and even Maria started avoiding me. I felt completely alone, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. Armed with a crowbar and a flashlight, I pried open the panel in my closet and crawled back into the hidden passageway. If someone, or something, was in there, I was going to find out. The tunnel seemed darker and more oppressive than before. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. As I moved deeper into the labyrinth, I found more evidence of someone living there. Discarded food wrappers, a worn blanket, and even a journal. The journal belonged to the previous tenant, a young woman named Rachel. Her entries started off normal but grew increasingly erratic, describing the same noises and disturbances I had experienced. The last entry sent chills down my spine. "It's in the walls. It watches me. I can feel it breathing. If you find this, please, don't let it take you to." Suddenly I heard a noise behind me, a low, guttural growl. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but I saw nothing. The growl grew louder, closer, until I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my apartment, slamming the closet panel shut and barricading it with everything I could find. I moved out the next day, leaving most of my belongings behind. I couldn't bear to spend another night in that place. A few weeks later, I saw a news report about the building. A new tenant had gone missing, and the police had launched an investigation. The footage showed them tearing down walls and uncovering more hidden passageways, along with something else. The camera cut away before I could see what they found, but the look on the officers' faces said it all. To this day, I don't know what was living in those walls. All I know is that I'll never forget the sound of that whisper, or the feeling of being watched. Moving out should have been the end of the nightmare, but it wasn't. Whatever had haunted that apartment seemed unwilling to let me go. Even miles away in a new town, the lingering presence followed, an invisible thread connecting me to the horrors I thought I'd left behind. The first sign was subtle. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain that I'd heard the faint creak of floorboards. Sometimes I'd find things in my new apartment slightly out of place. A mug moved from the kitchen counter to the sink, a closet door left ajar. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, or maybe just the stress of everything I'd been through. But deep down, I knew better. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching. It wasn't loud, just a faint, repetitive noise coming from behind the walls of my bedroom. My heart sank as memories of the hidden passageways flooded back. I pressed my ear to the wall, holding my breath. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper. "I found you." I couldn't live like that anymore. I needed answers, closure, anything to make it stop. I started digging into the history of the old building, hoping to uncover the truth behind the haunting. What I found chilled me to my core. The building had a long and tragic history, dating back over a century. It had been a boarding house in the early 1900s, and during that time, there were rumors of strange disappearances. Tenants would vanish without a trace, leaving behind all their belongings. One newspaper article from the 1920s mentioned a man named Henry Grayson, the building's landlord at the time. Neighbors had reported hearing screams coming from the walls, but when the police investigated, they found nothing. Grayson denied any wrongdoing, but shortly after the investigation, he disappeared too. The article speculated that Grayson had been using the hidden passageways to spy on and harm his tenants, but no concrete evidence was ever found. Armed with this new knowledge, I decided to confront Maria one last time. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it was her. When I arrived at her apartment, I was shocked to find it completely empty. The door was ajar, and inside the walls were stripped bare. It looked like she had left in a hurry, leaving behind only a few pieces of furniture and some scattered papers. Among the papers, I found a drawing, a crude sketch of a figure with hollow eyes and a wide, sinister grin. Written beneath it were the words, "It's still here." I left her apartment shaken, feeling more alone than ever. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every shadow in the room seeming to shift and move. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted off. I woke up to the feeling of something cold brushing against my face. When I opened my eyes, I saw it. A pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes stared down at me from the corner of the room. Its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too jagged. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as it slowly crawled toward me, its bony fingers scraping against the floor. Somehow, I managed to snap out of my paralysis and bolted from the bed. I grabbed the closest object, a heavy lamp, and swung it at the figure. But the lamp passed through it like smoke, and it vanished into the darkness. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of the room, clutching a flashlight and praying for dawn. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep running. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't bound to a location. It was bound to me. I contacted a paranormal investigator, a man named Paul, who had been recommended by one of Maria's old neighbors. When Paul arrived, he immediately sensed the presence in my apartment. "It's strong," he said, his voice grim, "and it's angry." Paul conducted a cleansing ritual, using sage, candles, and chants in an attempt to banish the spirit. For a while, the air in the apartment felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. But then, the scratching started again. Paul's face went pale as the scratching grew louder, more frantic. "It's not leaving," he said. "It's tied to you somehow. You need to leave this place now." We barely made it out of the apartment before the lights began flickering and the walls shook violently. I heard the whisper again, louder this time, echoing through the hallway. "You can't escape me." I moved again, this time to a different city. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, and tried to start over. For a while, things seemed normal. The noises stopped, and I finally began to feel like myself again. But then, last week, I found a photo slipped under my door. It was a picture of me, taken from inside my apartment. I don't know how to stop this. All I know is that it's still out there, watching, waiting. And no matter where I go, it always finds me. If you ever feel like you're being watched, if you hear whispers in the dark or footsteps in the walls, don't ignore it. Because once it finds you, it never lets go. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to hear more scary stories, please like and subscribe to my channel.